Most creative comedian and the most imaginative. Hello, I'm John Barber. I'm sitting in one of the most modern videotape editing facilities in the world. Everything here is computerized or push button. Any special effect that you could ever want or imagine can be produced instantaneously. Now, while these effects may dazzle the eye, they do little to improve the content. Today, everybody wants to use this technology, but few have the imagination. Back in 1951, this technology did not exist, which makes one marvel all the more at the accomplishments of Ernie Kovacs. When Ernie got into television, there was no color, no videotape, and nearly everything went out live. Comedy on television was primarily photographed vaudeville. Performers like Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Lucille Ball, and others dominated the medium, but only Ernie Kovacs used and understood it. Now, these vaudeville and skit performers were excellent and very, very funny. But in the new age of electronic entertainment, they were still playing checkers, while Ernie Kovacs was inventing Pac-Man. In this 90-minute special, we're going to talk to some of the people who watched Ernie, who worked with him, were influenced by him, and who loved him. And we're going to see some of television's most wonderful magic moments produced by Ernie Kovacs, television's original genius. As a youngster in Trenton, New Jersey, Ernie used to love to dress up in costume and perform, either in school plays or his backyard. His love of costumes may have come from his father, who was an ex-policeman, and the sharpness of his mind and his mischievousness from his mother. When he would duck out of the house as a youngster, which was frequently, what he would do to annoy his mother is draw footprints up the wall, across the ceiling, down the other wall, and outside. During the 1940s and in his 20s, Ernie became a local celebrity on radio station WTTM. And to enhance the wrestling matches he was announcing, he would take chicken bones and break them in the microphone, and once on a remote, to give the audience the feeling of what it would be like to be run over by a train, he actually lay down in the railroad tracks and had a train run over his microphone. He eventually got up to do a morning show called Coffee with Kovacs.
Have you been annoyed with long, cool smokes? Take a good look at this chart. Here is cigarette A. By the time the smoke gets from here to here, the nice hot smoke is practically cold. Do you want a frozen lip from cold smoke? No. Then smoke a short, hot briefy, the new short, hot smoke. First, at long last.
If you want to smoke that short and hot,
his success as a morning television personality in Trenton led to a chance to become a morning television personality in Philadelphia, and cooking shows were never the same.
This one, the first time I've seen a head of lettuce that had a swell head. Bucking for your own show, eh? Huh? Yeah. Take a little bit of lettuce and gently drop it in here. Don't pad your part. I heard you sneak that line. And you just get enough of this to...
Joe Behar, currently directing Days of Our Lives, was Ernie's first director in Philadelphia.
If you go back to the early 50s and think of a normal cooking show, which was supposed to be a straight show for the audience of the women at home, and he goes in there and creates a shambles, and nobody's ever seen anything like that before, and everybody was astounded at what he was doing. You know, that in that time, that is a kind of a kooky thing to do, and that's what kind of started everybody thinking him in those terms.
Good night, my Frau.
After the cooking show, we did a show called Free to Get Ready, which was on from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock every morning on the local station down there. And at that point, it was supposed to be a television disc jockey show in which he would play records. And then we were wondering what he was going to do while he was playing records, what visual things we could do. And that's when he would start to draw crazy pictures and put them in front of the screen. Then the prop people would throw him props, and he would just improvise on the props that he had there. And that was, I think, what the most original things he started to do. And then he would just go on from there, and he would build. And over the course, I think we were on the air about a year, it got more and more insane every morning until it got a tremendous rating.
When When a production assistant threw Ernie a pair of glasses with bugged-out eyes attached to them, Ernie created one of his most memorable characters, Percy Dub Tonsils, sort of the Alfred E. Newman of the gay set.
I don't suppose many of us stop to understand the life of the bookworm, so I have written a poem entitled Ode to a Bookworm. Somebody seemed to have slipped a little fish into my martini. Some prankster on the form. Well, later perhaps. I'll join you. No, I don't suppose he'll drink too much, and he can't get the olive in his mouth. Ode to a Bookworm by Percy Dub Tonsils. Oh, hail to thee, thou streamlined fellow. You go through my book like a fork go through Jell-O. When I open a book and look back at the binding, little crumbs from your lunch always I'm finding. I saw you first, so trim and so spruce, as you gummed a few pages out of My Mother Goose. You browsed through my shelves, in your eye was a twinkle, as you ate the first chapter of old Rip Van Winkle. The next time I saw you, I was so miffed. You ate off the ending of inventor Tom Swift. You made little bites so round and so tidy, all over the back of my copy of Heidi. And then you reached manhood, I recall with some pain, when you first bit your way into Mickey's Spillane. You ate chapter 1 and then began rushing. On chapter 13, I noticed you blushing. As the years passed on by, you continued to munch. You were big enough then to eat Ivanhoe for lunch. And then you ate Lawrence of Arabia. I heard your loud sigh as you lay gasping for water. The book was so dry. Today is your birthday. May you live good and long, so the night will be filled with your nibbling song. Now you can eat my present from the back to the front, for today I've enrolled you in the book of the month. Echo to Bookworm.
Ernie and I, and for that matter, Jack Parr and some of the other guys, may have had the slight advantage that we came out of radio. Radio was, if one did comedy, that was marvelous preparation for television, and I suppose even outside the limits of comedy, if you did news or announcing or singing, whatever, the radio background was very helpful. Radio, of course, required at least a minimum degree of articulateness. On television, you can go, oh yeah, scratch yourself, and if something else interesting is going on, you can get a career going that way. But
Ernie's first national show came in the summer of 1951. 15 minutes a day out of Philadelphia from 3:15 to 3:30. It was called It's Time for Ernie. These shows began to indicate the way Ernie was beginning to use the medium to express his comedy and his craft, beginning with a bow and arrow bit, which was one of the many kinds of pieces Ernie did that were seen later on the Steve Allen Tonight Show. Also in this visual medium, Ernie used sound unlike anybody before or since.
I guess everything. Now then, over here you turn your set on, of course. You get to your horizontal picture and you turn it just a little bit. Now watch, Steve, watch what happens. No, not too far, Kurt. No, that's all right. No, you're going the other way. You feel... No, no. Right in the middle. Right there. That's fine. If you turn too far this way, you get... Too far that way. You see? Now you take your vertical. Your vertical lengthens the picture this way, which is vertical like the crossword puzzles. Right? Oh, oh. Right in the middle. Head on. Is that the wire? Well, you shouldn't leave that on the radiator. Remove the elastic. Maybe you don't need... Oh, you don't have to wear that. Let's see. Isn't it? You just tried. Yeah, well, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Throughout his career, Ernie loved to do weird and wonderful things with paintings and pictures.
Here's a picture. I've never been able to straighten this thing out now. If I get that just about here, that's there, that's much better. Right about like that. A little more to the right.
The first time I saw Ernie Kovacs' work, I believe was when I was a tot, around 9, 10, maybe a little bit older, in Woodstock, New York, where I grew up. And it was during the summer, and my brother and I watched, I think, about a half hour of Ernie. He'd do his Percy Dove tonsils and put those glasses on. We thought he was magnificent. This is around the era of Milton Berle, whom we didn't watch at all. We thought that was sort of cheap, easy, proscenium vaudeville television, which is what most of the stuff was. Really, it was a man's personality that made it work. There aren't many men like Ernie Kovacs around anymore who can do that. I mean, he had a way with that cigar and that cheeky smile, you know, that blinking, which said, I'm not going to hurt you, but boy, is this going to be fun.
The ideal time for Ernie would have been in the silent films of the 1920s. He would have made an ace gag writer for Mack Sennett or for Laurel and Hardy Pictures or for Chaplin a little earlier.
To me, Ernie had what I call a true sense of humor. I think we misuse the term. When we say someone has a sense of humor, what we really mean is they have an appreciation of humor because they will laugh. They won't say, I don't get it. They'll laugh. They will understand that it is funny. Ernie had the sense of humor of seeing what is funny and how to get to it, you see. Then somebody else would laugh with an appreciation of his sense of humor that was innate.
What were your impressions of him when you met him?
It was one of those immediate things. We were just on the same wavelength right away. It's like with crazy Walter Matthau, who's about my closest friend. It's just that it hits right off the bat.
When you sometimes look at Walter Matthau, do you see Ernie Kovacs?
Walter, yes, he reminds me of Ernie, not really that he is physically or in his mannerisms exactly like Ernie, but he has mannerisms, as did Ernie, that are uniquely his.
Sometimes Ernie did 2 or 3 shows a day, but his basic staff salary was still under $200 a week, which was barely enough to support his 20 cigars a day habit and his gambling, let alone his first wife Betty and the 2 infant girls.
We would have a poker game once or twice a week. And one time, I remember a funny thing happened. We were over his apartment, which was a very small apartment, to play cards, and it was so small that he did not have a poker table, and it was the responsibility of one of the players to bring the table. Well, the player that was supposed to bring the table forgot. Well, he went into a panic. You know, it was 8 o'clock, and he wanted to start, and he said, where can we play? And I said, well, I don't know, we could sit on the floor. And he said, no, that's no good. And he said, I got an idea. And he went and he took the hinges off the front door, true story, and we all sat down on the floor cross-legged, if you can imagine, 6 people, and we balanced this rectangular door on our knees, uncomfortable as off, and we played cards that way. Now, you couldn't get up because you would unbalance the table, so if you did have to get up, you'd have to announce it.
Ernie was stubborn. One day I had aces wired, so I kicked them. After all, he's my friend. I says, Ernie, get out. I got aces wired. He says, I can't get out. I got a pair of deuces. I says, Ernie, I got aces. Oh, no, I'm liable to catch another deuce.
Was Ernie a good gambler?
Terrible. Ernie, I beg your pardon. Ernie and Walter are very much alike. I forgot about that. I sat and held Jim for 40 minutes once before he finally could get Jim. I just sat and held it just to see how long it would take him. He was down to the last card in the deck, and he's still going there.
What a dish, huh? Ooh, what a dish. Second dish, Edith Adams.
For just a chance to love you.
It was in Philadelphia he met Edie Adams, the lady who was to become his second wife.
We saw her in the amateur hour, and I told Ernie about her. I said, I saw this girl who has a great singing voice, and I think we can, maybe get her because she hasn't done anything professionally. So she came down from New York.
I was on the Arthur Godfrey show in a loser, and I sang a song. I didn't know any popular songs, so because I was out of Juilliard. And they said, if you want to go on in show business, sing a pop song. I didn't know any, so I went out and bought Patti Page's record of Would I Love You, Love You.
Would I love you, love you, love you with all my heart and soul, with all my heart and soul.
I walked in and I saw this, he had a big hat on and a cigar and a mustache and a foreign name. And nobody in my family had ever looked like that or sounded like that. So I said, I don't know what this is, but this is for me. This is very... Ernie wanted to do, as I say, the back of the head comedy. Whatever was in the back of the head, he would just project it right up there on the screen. And he also had that funny machine over there to play with. And we did a lot of playing long before anybody knew what we were playing with. He got a kid's kaleidoscope one morning because we had these 3 hours to kill. We had to figure out what we were doing. And it wouldn't fit on the lens. So he got a fruit juice can, a little orange juice, frozen orange juice can, and he put that on the lens and taped it, then put the kaleidoscope on the other end and a flashlight. Then he put a record on so we could kill 3 minutes with that. So he was there and make this thing go back and forth. Now, if you want to try that today, I think it's $60,000 a minute or something for special effects.
So with a 19-cent orange juice can attached to a camera lens, Ernie created the first psychedelic image ever seen on the screen. Except for his lack of winnings in the card games and a messy divorce custody battle, everything was going great for Ernie in Philadelphia. Nobody in broadcasting thought anybody would get up in the morning to watch television. But Ernie Kovacs' audiences were so big, it may have inspired Pat Weaver at NBC to initiate the Today Show with Dave Garroway, a move that would cost Ernie his show.
When they took him off the air, he was very upset at that, because he had a successful show. And he went up to New York, and I didn't go with him there. I lost track of him for a while.
I don't know if we're on color or not tonight, but in case you just have a black and white set and don't have color, and we are in color...
In New York, Ernie appeared on WABD, Channel 5, the third-place Dumont network, and continued to experiment with his new technological toys.
Regnen Handschuh, drauf man keine Untat ließ. Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne, und die trägt er im Gesicht. Und McKees, der hat sein Messer, doch das Messer sieht...
Arthur B. Kosnowski of Macon, Indiana writes, Dear Mr. Question Man,
I am writing to you from inside a burning warehouse. Let me take a moment of your time to go back a bit.
Ernie's show, which was regional, was up against Steve Allen's Tonight Show, which was network. And frequently, the night after Ernie performed a bit, it would end up on Steve's show, including Ernie's Question Man, which on Steve's show became the Answer Man and survives today on the Johnny Carson Tonight Show as Karnak. This was happening so often that one night Ernie went on the air live and told Steve's writers to get their own stuff.
I've heard various people say that Ernie and I were doing the same kinds of things at about that time. My 3 years of the Tonight Show were, well, there was 4 years, 53, 54, 55, 56. But if I ever had found out that any of my writers were borrowing things from anybody else, I would have raised hell, because it was far...
I thought you were going to say I raised their salary.
But there's far too much of that in TV, and it was then, still is, I'm sorry to say.
At Dumont, Ernie also created a musical group whose appeal was as instant as it is perennial.
Somebody brought in a record, Peter Hanley, and he said, I thought you'd like this. And I remembered he sat there. He said, now just don't talk for a second, just don't talk. And he said, okay, you sit there on the piano, you sit there, and within 15 minutes that was all worked out. And the Nairobi Trio, you can't explain it's about these 3 apes, but that's got to be from the back of the head. That's that creative part that he didn't want anyone to interfere with. He just wanted to just bring that right up to the floor.
Edie was sometimes one of the apes in costume, and a few times it was Jack Lemmon.
For example, I did the Nairobi Trio, and I did it with Ernie and I did it without Ernie. But more than ever, and I've been fooling around with comedy for a long time, once I was actually doing it, I realized the man's genius in the simplicity. That crazy thing is fascinating, and it's wonderful, and nothing happens. You'll screw it up totally if you throw in one more take or anything. It's just, everything is very slow, and then just a little look over here, and then back. It is absolute economy.
Do, mi, do.
An audience. He said, this is not for an audience. And it's not a photographed vaudeville show. This is peculiar to the medium. He always used to have battles with everybody because they wanted audiences and canned laughter, and that was just a no-no. he could go and watch a Milton Berle in rehearsal and say, he's right, because Milton is, you know, he has that whistle when but for that kind of comedy, he was absolutely right.
About this time, Ernie and Edie got married.
I was then doing Wonderful Town, and after Wonderful Town, I decided that I was going to go on a trip. And he was furious. He didn't want any part of that. And he used to come banging on the door. He'd hang up the phone and I'd hang it, and he'd be banging on the door. So I said, I'm leaving and I'm going on this trip, and he told my parents I was in another cabin, and he showed up with, like, Marx Brothers, flowers, the whole thing, and I thought, well, that's the end of that. I went over there and I was seasick before I got past the Statue of Liberty.
Ernie's divorce from his first wife may have been final, but Ernie's daughter, Kippy, told me her father's problems with her mother were only just beginning.
When I was about 5 years old and my sister was 20 months older, my mother, who had divorced my father, my real mother, had lost custody. In fact, it was the first case of the father winning custody in a divorce with a husband and wife both alive and all right mentally and so forth. And he had won custody of us. And she had kidnapped us. And one Sunday afternoon, she just took us away. She said, we're going on a boat ride. And she took us to Florida. And my father, for 2 years, was looking for us. He had spent tremendous amounts of money with private detectives and just different people giving him false leads, telling him where we were. And I know he must have gone through a lot. I mean, children at that age don't go through, because they adapt so easily. I didn't even know what was happening. And then the only thing I remember is every time we'd be driving in a car, my mother would say, "Duck, here come the cops." So I still do that today. You know, when police come by, driving by, and they always stop me and they say, "You look suspicious." And it's just because I was raised that way.
It was just crazy. I remember once he put his fist through a door. I mean, he didn't know what. He just couldn't figure it out. Because they had said something about, she's going to take us this week or something like that. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, she won't." And they went to pick them up and they weren't there. They disappeared for, I guess it was almost 2 years.
During the 2 years Ernie searched for his daughters, he still had to make people laugh and make enough money to support himself and Edie and the private detectives whose bills were exceeding $50,000. And because of these costs, at this time, Ernie neglected to pay his income tax, a move that would come back to haunt him. However, his problems never showed on camera. And one performer who worked with him for nearly 3 years, Bill Hayes, who is now the popular star of Days of Our Lives, recalls a couple of the more slapstick moments.
Ernie a few times played a magician. Of course, nothing ever worked, and sometimes he took a bow on nothing. I gotta tell you two things about that. One was that he had a bit where he had this, it was like a J. Arthur Rank gong beater, and he would go. A pretty girl would come on stage and give him a flask and a shot glass, and the flask was filled with tea, and he would pour and knock it down. Happened several times during the sketch. Well, it's all live, you know. That night, Perry Cross told us, "I'm putting real booze in." And the realization that hit his mind is a wonderful take. He looked at us and he knows it's going to be booze every time from now on. He's counting in his head, how many times do I have to do this and stay on the air? It's a wonderful take. I was, I think, just a last-minute idea of somebody's, either Ernie's or the producers or Barry Shear, the director, somebody. My rehearsal consisted of as follows: you are a hick, you stand off camera, and whenever Ernie says, "Could I have somebody from the audience help me?" you come up out of the audience.
Will some young man from the audience care to come up to assist me?
now the great Matzo will perform another great feat of magic. But first... Better order another case of that. The great Matzo's running a little low. Thank you for your assistance, young man. No personal problems. I'm sorry, we just do magic tricks. Step down.
My first bit was very short. Then he called me up 2 or 3 times more, and every time I came up, they just escorted me out, just threw me off the stage.
Would someone from the audience care to come up and inspect this case? All right, now, the great Matzo will begin sawing. Are you ready, my dear?
Ready, ready!
When we were finally reunited, it was so beautiful. I was in the back, and my real mother said something to the fact that he was there, and I ran and hid in the shower. I don't know why, and I turned it on, which is the most ridiculous thing you can do if you're hiding from somebody. It's like saying, "Here I am." I always thought about that later, and when I got into the car, I was sucking my thumb, as I had always done, and he said, "You're still sucking your thumb." And I said, "Well, you're still smoking cigars." And that was it. And we got back together, and we were always close from then on again.
When NBC asked Steve Allen to host an hour variety show on Sunday nights opposite Ed Sullivan on CBS, Steve recommended 2 hosts.
So I said, there are 2 guys in town, that being New York, who could do this as well as I can. They're Jack Parr and Ernie Kovacs, and you could flip a coin and, not come out badly on that. So I don't know whether they flipped the coin or not, but Ernie, for a while, was doing Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Tonight, live from New York, it's Ernie Kovacs.
I remember at one point waiting a long time for this timpani player. This is, again, a recollection. I don't know if it's exactly true, but I just remember the funny things. Waiting and waiting for this man to hit this big kettle drum and going in. He was clearly the man who understood the meaning of the element of surprise. Ernie would take the medium itself and say, no matter what, we know you expect everything to go smoothly, and it's not going to. And it never left me. I took that with me as a writer all through Smothers Brothers and American Dream Machine and right into the Saturday Night Live show. Influenced me tremendously.
On The Tonight Show, if a guest got a little boring, as in this interview with Gene Shepard, Ernie would split the screen and try to get the guest's words to come out of his mouth.
Says, time now for the secret message. Quit mugging it up. Time now, scene stealer. Time now for the secret message tonight, boys and girls. Set your decoder pin at B12.
Partially because Ernie's skits kept running into commercial time, and partially because of what one executive said was Ernie's lack of discipline, The Tonight Show in its entirety was turned over to Jack Parr. As host, Ernie lasted through the summer of 1956, but while on the show, he created a silent character called Eugene that will last forever. In January of 1957, NBC had 30 minutes that nobody wanted to fill. Jerry Lewis, comedy's megastar at the time, had been offered a 90-minute special by NBC following his breakup with Dean Martin. Jerry took 60 minutes. The only one courageous enough, or creative enough, or gambler enough to follow it was Ernie Kovacs. Ernie went on the air with a character who didn't speak. And afterwards, nobody was speaking about Martin and Lewis.
Your love and kisses gave that flame a start. I put it out with my tears. You don't remember, I can't forget that old affection lives with me yet. I keep on longing to my regret. I know I can't forget. There's a little spark of love still burning and yearning down in my heart for you. There's a longing there for years returning. I want you. Come to my heart again. Come, set that love aflame. For there's a little spark of love still burning and yearning for you. I left you laughing when I said goodbye, laughing but...
The Eugene Show won Ernie an Emmy and a cover in Life magazine.
Those were all his ideas. He'd talk them over with all his people, but those were his ideas. Thinking up things. Now, if I tilt the camera this way and I put something, a desk, at the same angle, it'll look like we're sitting up straight. When we straighten out, he figured out all those things himself.
Some of those sight gags, of course, were classics. Some of them were little quick, subtle things, like looking at the library books and pulling out Camille and hearing a little, you know, just as he looks at the book.
See, the whole time I'm talking to you and answering these questions, I'm thinking of this face, Ernie Kovacs. Because if you watch the face, you may not even be aware of the magic that's going on around him, which he makes work. And the amount of work he did behind the camera is incredible, particularly in those days when, you know, you edited with scissors. Everybody's tried it, but nobody's brought it off the way he did.
And the real way to tell when somebody has so much talent like that is that nobody ever tried to do an impersonation of him. Nobody ever tried to do anything. Nobody could even come anywhere near him in regard to what he was doing.
Following the Eugene Show and the Life magazine story, Ernie, Edie, and the two girls moved to Hollywood, where Ernie had been signed by Columbia Pictures. In Operation Madball and almost every other movie Ernie made, he played some sort of captain, Army, Navy, or Cuban. To confine and ignore Ernie's great comic talents on even a larger screen was like putting Pavarotti on the stage of the Met and telling him not to sing. Hum a little.
Hi, and welcome to TV's new panel show, Whom Done It?
Often on the air, Ernie had spoofed quiz shows, like in this takeoff of What's My Line, called Whom Done It? A mystery celebrity would shoot somebody, and the panel would have to guess whom done it.
Ready with another bullet, mystery celebrity? Then let's have another go at it. And now let's tell our audience at home who wounded tonight's studio guest.
Tonight, our mystery celebrity who wounded this guest is Dr. Harvey Serene, curator for the Museum of Portugal.
All right, sir. You now have $50.
By now, Ernie's income was over $500,000 a year, but it was still barely enough to pay for his fairly extravagant living expenses and his gin games with his cronies and co-workers whom he saw daily. This was primarily because of the huge hunks taken by the Internal Revenue Service, whom he tried not to see at all. So in the fall of 1959, Ernie ended up hosting a for-real panel show sponsored by Dutch Master Cigars called Take a Good Look. In this, he would perform and tape clues about a mystery guest. In this case, golfer Ken Venturi, who just won the Crosby at Pebble Beach.
There's your first clue. You have $50. Let's start questioning with Edie Adams.
According to Vice President of Consolidated Cigars, Jack Mogilescu, Ernie was their third choice to host.
Mike Wallace was on the pilot. In those days, Mike was the original tough reporter. And I don't mean this being critical. It was dull. I mean, you know, it really might win an Emmy for dullness if we ever got it on the air. Somebody suggested we talk to George Burns. We talked to George Burns about doing this show, and George thought this was really not for him. Somebody mentioned Ernie Kovacs, and that sounded all right. Anyway, Irving Mansfield got Ernie Kovacs, who immediately changed the show from a serious show to a show which not only confused the audience, confused the contestants. Edie Adams, Hans Conried, I think Cesar Romero, I think Zsa Zsa Gabor was on it. I think Zsa Zsa was so confused on one show that she forgot to get married.
Henry Bollinger, the only publicist Ernie would talk to, told us how Ernie met Jack Mogilescu, the only sponsor Ernie would ever talk to.
Ernie had always been very suspicious of sponsors. He felt that they had a more negative attitudes towards the things that go on or go into their shows. Whether he was right or wrong, that's what he felt. And at the same time, his sponsor at the time, Consolidated Cigar, purchased his show. They didn't have just a spot. They sponsored the entire show. And there was a gentleman who had taken over the marketing job at Consolidated by the name of Jack Mogilescu, who wanted to meet Ernie.
I came over to the set to see them shoot the commercial and meet Edie. And I happened at that time to be interested in Bertolt Brecht. I was carrying a couple of Bertolt Brecht books. Little did I know that in addition to doing cigar commercials, Edie had done Mahagoni and a few other things of Brecht. And the next thing I knew, I met Ernie, who couldn't believe that somebody associated either with a sponsor or advertising could read, much less know anything about Bertolt Brecht.
And from that moment on, Ernie and Jack Mogilescu became the closest of friends because he couldn't believe that a sponsor would be the type of person who'd read this kind of good literature.
What happens is you hire somebody to do a commercial, and the first thing you do is you bring in 10 other people to change his personality. Well, we had discussed this, and we had decided that if we were to make any kind of success out of Ernie in terms of doing commercials, we really told him to do what he wanted to do. And the show, the ratings on the show were not really that good, but the sales of Dutch Masters responded.
Ernie put as much invention and intelligence into those Dutch Masters commercials as he did into any show, and to this day, they too survive as minor comic commercial masterpieces. ABC didn't think enough people were taking a good look at Take a Good Look, so they took it off the air.
We were trying to find something for Ernie, and Ernie was interested in doing what should have been a special, would have been an hour special. We couldn't afford, frankly, an hour special, so we asked about half-hour specials, and Ernie said he was ready to do them. And the only reason they got on the air was because we had become, at that time, fairly substantial buyers of television time from ABC. And in addition to which, I think they thought it was nice having Ernie Kovacs as a relief to the westerns and the violence and everything else. Ernie really was, you know, they gave him an ill-favored spot, 10:30 in the evening, when they couldn't lose any audience.
Ernie's last half-hour specials aired monthly from April of 1961 to January of 1962, and they crystallized his inventive comic genius and his love of music and props.
Actually, there is a purpose to this program, although it may not seem so to the naked eye, if I may use that expression on television. The inherent love that I have for music is really why I'm here. The money means nothing. The money is nothing, consequently it means nothing. It is very little. But it is a desire to illustrate music, taking sound to sight, more or less.
there's a standard formula for success in the entertainment medium, and that is beat it to death if it succeeds. Let's take westerns tonight. Now, at one time, the final gun duel was the big thing, and we were satisfied to see this. After westerns practically filled the air, it was the general feeling of the trade that at least they could vary the gun duels, which occurred some 200-300 times a week. An interesting camera shot developed on one western, sponsored by a hat manufacturer. By now, we had seen so much of the cowboy in the final duel that the TV director began concentrating on everything but the gunmen doing the shooting. The only thing that hadn't been photographed was the bullet. And then one night, on the new western,
He brought back Joe Behar as director and brought back Percy Dove Tonsils.
One of the problems he had at the network was the Percy Dove Tonsils character, which the network objected to. They went along with it because he said he would do that regardless of what they said.
this poem is called Leslie, the mean animal trainer. Leslie worked in a circus. He worked in a great big cage. He smacked the lions and beat the bears and put them all in a rage. He kicked the tigers with iron sneakers and rolled up army cots. He put cleaning fluid on all the leopards and sneered when they lost their spots. Isn't that ridiculous?
Ernie knew that each joke had its own special rhythm and chemistry. If you altered the length, the word, anything, you destroyed the joke. One great example of his daring not to tamper with that comic chemistry is a monologue as Menelaus in which you become convinced he'd rather be a serious actor.
Now I see. Curse her, I scarce can speak the name she bears that was my wife. Here among the prisoners they keep her, in these huts, among the hordes of numbered slaves. Mine host, whose laboring sword won her, has given her up to me to feel my pleasure. Perchance to kill or not kill, but lead her home. Over the long seas I will bear her back, and there, cast out so whatso rack of angry death they may devise. Those who know their dearest dead for her in Ilion. Ho, ye soldiers! Up into the chambers where she croucheth! Grip the line, blood-reeking hair, and drag her into mine eyes! And when there come fair breezes, my long ships shall bear her home.
Gene Lukowski, who sat in the control room with Ernie as his technical director, is still with ABC. He said the all-night editing involved the tedious task of having to take 2-inch tape and cut it with razor blades or scissors, and that these monumental sessions frequently required a pick-me-up.
We drank. We all drank. Matter of fact, we drank in the control room. And by noon, we were half smashed. We'd have lunch and try to sober up.
He drank a lot, but I never saw him swaggering or slurring his speech, anything like that. He never seemed out of control.
Marvin Moss, Ernie's television agent, said Ernie's close relationship with his crew was unlike any in show business.
The crew that worked on the television shows, Ernie loved them. It's the only time I've ever known where the crew used to get together and collect money among them and take full-page ads in a Variety and the Hollywood Reporter announcing the next Ernie Kovacs show. And the crew paid for the ads.
People in my crew cut corners to try to hold down the costs. Of course, Ernie was extravagant, and the crew benefited financially.
Ernie was spending money on the cruise and losing money on the shows.
And the way the show was set up basically was Ernie got X dollars, and he delivered the show. So whatever, if he got $100 for the show, and the show cost 70, he made 30. Cost 110, he lost $10. Ernie never cared about the money, and he never made as much money on the show as he should have made, and in fact lost money on a number of them, because that was Ernie. And also, Ernie in his strive for perfection, he'd book the studio for 8 hours, which let's assume was a reasonable number to do the show. Ernie'd work all night.
In striving for perfection and a laugh, on one of the specials, Ernie spent almost 25% of his budget on a sight gag that didn't last 8 seconds.
He decided that he would do a gag in which he would appear as the used car salesman doing a commercial on television. And as he came to the car, and the moment he touched it, the car would actually go right through the floor.
We built a platform that was 5 feet high, and we brought a Volkswagen in and put it on the top of that platform, and then they scored the wood under the Volkswagen with a saw so that it would just barely hold up the Volkswagen.
The budget, or the cost to do that stunt, was around a little more than $12,000, and it was literally going to be on the air for less than 30 seconds. As a matter of fact, maybe even 10 seconds.
I will tell you, that was an expensive car.
The shows went into the hole, and so did Ernie. He was still gambling, and his financial affairs were a mess.
He had crazy corporations in Canada with oddball names. It's like the old stories you hear about W.C. Fields having bank accounts they still can't find, where he have all these different little bank accounts under other names. Ernie had a million of them.
When he went out to Vegas, we were in Sardi's, and he said, I lost a lot of money. And I said, well, how much? And where are the commas? And he finally told me, and I said, well, that's not good. You shouldn't do that. So I went out and I bought myself a chinchilla coat for exactly the same amount. And then he'd gamble, and I'd find out again. I bought a harpsichord. He said, well, we can't afford that. And I said, well, then stop gambling. It's very simple.
Did he ever stop?
No, he would sort of reduce it down. And now that I know about it, I've read all the books on gambling. It's just something that you don't say stop. It's like to a drunk, you don't say stop drinking, or to a gambler, it's a psychological problem. It's I guess a self-destructive thing. It's just a little slower. So he would, instead of taking these big poker games, he would do gin games, and they were still pretty big games. But he really couldn't help it.
Talk about gambling. At one point, he and 3 or 4 other cigar smokers out here bought a whole hill outside of Havana, right? A whole hill. It was supposed to be the best hill in all of Cuba for the cream of the crop of the Cuban cigars, and they paid cash for it. And the next day, Kennedy put the embargo on, and they couldn't bring any cigars in, and you still can't. Well, you can now, I guess. To this day, never got the cigars, never got his money back, nothing.
He was in a 91% bracket. Now, that curious state of affairs does not exist anymore, but in those days, he was not into money or money managers or whatever. It just meant nothing to him. I earned it, I'm going to spend it. And in the 91% bracket, you earn 9 cents out of every dollar. Your 91 cents is not, or $100,000, you earn $9,000, not $91,000. They have since changed the laws, and he did not want to be bothered incorporating and doing all the things that people now do in show business or sports or wherever your life is limited. And he earned it, and he figured he should spend it, and I think he was right.
He did demand some privacy when he worked. Like, he would write for 4 days nonstop without sleeping, without eating, I think. You know, I mean, maybe a little bit something. And just smoking his cigars and maybe drinking a few drinks and working. And he would do that for 4 days nonstop. And there would be a sign outside of the den, the well-known, really wonderful den that he had designed. And it would say, it would go on, the light would be switched on, it would say, "Not now," which meant, "Don't you dare come in this room, I'm working."
He liked to use non-actors in his sketches because he said they don't have any preconceived idea of what they're doing, and I can always orchestrate them the way I want.
Hi. Weather lovely.
One of the performers Ernie hired was Jolene Brand. She was married to a former bouncer at Ciro's nightclub in the Sunset Strip. Edie said he used to just hang around Ernie all the time. In the mid-'60s, this fellow sold to NBC a show called something like Wacky World, to be hosted by Rowan and Martin. An Australian writer-comedian named Digby Wolfe suggested the title be changed to Laugh-In. Scores of Ernie's quick bits, which to this day many people think were the trademark and originated with Laugh-In, were really Ernie Kovacs.
Listen, if you look a little conspicuous, you look like spies or something. You got a disguise, maybe?
I am always ready with a disguise, X-19.
What was the other thing you was ready with for almost a minute now?
See?
Oh, yeah.
I am disguised as a surgeon.
Oh, yes. Those are those fish that swim upstream in the winter.
Brain surgeon.
Oh, those. They swim
Yeah.
up to the head. I know what you mean.
That's
Listen, you think you got a disguise?
You bring one?
They'll never notice me. Watch.
Let's see.
How you like that, huh? There's a little something that I whipped up. My tattoo doesn't show, does it?
Nein.
Let's go.
Ja.
Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne, den man Mäcki-Messer nennt. Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne, und die trägt er Feuer in Soho, 7 Kinder und sein Greis in der Menge. Mäcki-Messer, den man nicht fragt und der nichts weiß. Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne und die trägt er im Gesicht. Und Mäckis, der hat sein Messer, doch das Messer sieht man nicht. Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne, Haifischflossen, rot, wenn dieser Blut vergießt. Mäcki-Messer trägt den Handschuh, doch das Messer sieht man nicht. Ach, es sind es Haifischflossen, rot, wenn dieser Blut vergießt, an dem schönen Blau. Und so mancher reicher Mann und sein Geld hatte Mäcki-Messer, dem er nichts Es war ein Preis, wachte auf und war geschändet. zerreißt.
Mona Lisa, tak cię zowią, bo tak tajemniczy, piękny uśmiech masz. To dlatego, żeś ty zawsze jest samotna. Mony Lisy uśmiech zdobi twoją twarz.
John?
Się śmiejesz, by uwodzić, Mona Lisa. Czy też ukryć chcesz ten ból, co w sercu masz? Uwodzić, Mona Lisa. Czy też
John?
I've seen so many people try to copy him. Going back to that other show, that one with Rowan and Martin. They were good friends of the family, and Dan Rowan said how this show was a copy of my father's shows.
The influence that he had on me, I think, wasn't obvious to the television viewer when I sort of posthumously thanked Ernie for my Emmy. Saturday Night Live.
Saturday Night Live, which is still on the air, at night, 11 o'clock, is just a spin-off of what he started in '52. And in fact, I was watching the shows a few months ago, and he had a little car, and my mother, Edie, she was the voice of the little car, Howard. And it's the same thing as Mr. Bill. It was a very destructive thing against this little guy in a little car that he moved around, I believe, with a magnet underneath the table. And she was Howard's voice, and that was in '51.
The stress of trying to keep up the quality of his work and career and keep up with the Internal Revenue Service began to show on Ernie.
He came into Dominic's, and I took a look at him, and it was just, he was wiped out. And maybe I just imagined it, but there was also just sort of a terrible kind of look in his eyes that I had never seen before, where it was the first time I felt and mentioned after he left the table to Felicia that it's the first time I saw where he might feel like giving up.
The IRS did not hold with Ernie's idea that if he made it, he could spend it. So at the time, they were attaching things in our house. They were attaching furniture. They were attaching everything and taking our salaries. He had to take a show that he hated. He was doing a series. And for him, that was the end. He just didn't want it. He would do Broadway, he would direct, he would do anything, but to take a series was the ultimate. And he just hated it, and he felt that was demeaning, and that really, really broke him. He really didn't like doing that.
If Ernie were alive today, do you think he could get a job in network television today?
Yes, but he'd be running into the same problems because he'd still be ahead of everybody.
I think it could happen today to Ernie or somebody else, just the way it happened to Ernie then.
I doubt it. The reason I doubt he could get a network show is because the networks are so conscious of money and of giving the network audience what they expect and want. He was a person with a great and immense sense of danger to him, risk.
The reason that it might be difficult for Ernie to work in network television is not because his ideas were so revolutionary. It's just that he needed to work with a great deal of freedom.
Who's going to sponsor a madman like Ernie Kovacs who will do an entire show with an egg and a Band-Aid attached to his finger? I don't think that this is the particular medium to plunge in on and try to change. It's become a narcissistic medium with little bigger, younger Burt Reynoldses and people like that. It's become exploitive. It's become something else entirely.
Probably today he would have invented other things that would have been hard for the people of today to do on TV and in film.
I think he might be one of the great geniuses of film and tape today. He might have done an E.T., but out of his mind.
Yeah, I worked with Ernie the day the evening he was killed. We were doing the sweetening session, on the last special, and after we had finished, he had left and went to that party, and on the way home he was in that accident. I heard him, I couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. I cried.
On Saturday evening, January 13th, 1962, 6 days before his 43rd birthday, Ernie left a party at the home of director Billy Wilder in the hills above UCLA. He took a separate car from Edie and drove down Beverly Glen. Making the turn at Santa Monica Boulevard, he temporarily lost control of the car and totaled it. He died almost immediately. When they found him, it was probably one of the few times he was holding an unlit cigar.
I called the police department because they said, well, what, I'll be right over. They were sending Gene Dolson, who was a fellow policeman friend of ours that used to come over. And I said, well, gee, that sounds so funny. And I finally called up the L.A. Police Department, and I said, hi, this is Mrs. Ernie Kovacs. Can you, somebody just called me, and can you, and I heard him put his hand over the phone, and she said, he's on his way to the coroner. Will I tell Mrs. Kovacs? Oh, this is terrible. I don't mean to do this. It's been a while. So I knew then. It was, I couldn't think about it at the time. It just, I had to put it out of my mind.
Well, I was sleeping, and this friend of mine called me, a friend down the street, and she said, are you all right? And I said, yeah, what's wrong? She said, oh, nothing. And then I found out. My mother told us, Edie told us, and it still moves me, as you can see, as it does Edie and my sister, Elizabeth, and like it was yesterday. Like it was yesterday.
When Ernie died, he owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Internal Revenue Service and others. Since it wasn't Edie's debt, friends of hers suggested she file bankruptcy. She refused. Jack Lemmon offered to raise some money doing benefits. She ordered him not to. Instead, this lady who barely ever written a check in her life enrolled at UCLA at night to study tax law and business, then went to work doing everything from commercials to club dates and paid off her husband's debts. When Ernie died, the girl's real mother and Ernie's mother showed up to put a claim on the estate. When they found nothing was in it, they disappeared.
Long after Ernie had passed on, Edie was trying to get a hold of all other film and or tape or kinescopes, but in this case tape, of some of the shows that Ernie had done that he didn't have in his own library, so that she could have that collection. And she found out about half of them at ABC, they had just erased them so they could use the tape again. That's like saving 2 cents, you know, which is just a pity when you think of some of the work that man did.
Edie heard later that ABC was destroying some of her husband's tapes and using others as backdrops for the weather reports, so she worked even harder and went out and bought back everything of her husband's that she could lay her hands on. That cost her eventually nearly $400,000.
Yes, I do miss him. He's the only man that ever took care of me. He treated me like a little girl, and I loved it. Women's lib be damned. I don't mean this.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. Send in the clown. Don't you love farce? My fault, I fear. I thought that you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. But where are the clowns? Quick, send in the clowns. Don't bother, they're here. Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? Losing my timing this late in my career. And where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Well, maybe next year. Next year. Next
For all of us, being able to rub shoulders with Ernie Kovacs in this show has been a labor of love. For Edie Adams, saving this and other material of her husband's has been an act of love. Ernie was lucky to have Edie. Television was lucky to have Ernie. Probably television's only genius.